people have reported that they can be found in placenta. People have found them in reproductive organs, other tissues, and so trying to figure out what that actually means biologically is a big question. So yeah, I think it's scary, I think, to hear that, but at the same time still trying to figure out what is the mechanism associated with their potential to cause disease is still a big question mark. I'm Andrew Patterson. I'm the John T. and Paige S. Smith Professor in Agricultural Sciences. I think the EPA has made a really important step towards trying to understand a really complicated question, and that is, what are our exposures and how do we actually measure them accurately? I think this has been a longstanding question in the field, particularly around microplastics. I think people are alarmed because they're pervasive in the environment. They're in nearly everything that people have looked at to date, and then certainly enriched in certain tissues in humans. But I think the question is, what does that mean biologically? Is it truly causing disease or contributing to disease? And I think this is a step in the right direction to try to really tackle that question.
So the EPA released its 6th version of what we call a Contaminant Candidate List, and so this means that they've gone through a process of identifying contaminants that are candidates for drinking water standards. And so they've sort of met the threshold as being suspected as contaminants that have a human health concern, and so now they would be moving forward with doing additional toxicological studies and gathering more information to determine if there should be a standard set, and if so, what should that number be. Heather Preisendanz, faculty member in Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering, and I also serve as the director for our college's Research Institute, Sustainable Agricultural Food and Environmental Science, or SAFES for short. PFAS is a broad category of more than 15,000 compounds called per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and these are used in a lot of products that we use every day. So if you think about anything that you purchase that's stain resistant or water resistant, it likely has PFAS compounds in it, and so these are broadly referred to as forever chemicals because the things that make them desirable in our products make them hard to break down in the environment. And they're also really demonstrating some highly carcinogenic properties when they're found in our bodies. And so there's concerns from a human health perspective of them being in our drinking water.
They do represent some problems, and that is that they accumulate in our bodies. I think the last estimates suggest that nearly every person on Earth has some level of PFAS in their body, and it extends well beyond the human population, animals as well. Obviously, this is a human activity. We've generated these chemicals, and they have been demonstrated, or they have been associated, at least, with pretty significant diseases: cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease. There's reproductive issues associated with their exposures. Again, the challenge there, of course, is like a lot of the evidence supports that these may be associated. There's really no smoking gun yet to really pinpoint that indeed that this is really causing a specific effect attributed to this chemical exposure. The nice thing about this, they're putting a significant amount of money towards trying to address these questions, and more importantly, not only trying to understand what they're doing, but also how can we eliminate them from our exposure. So are there ways that we can mitigate that effect through, say, improved drinking water, purifications, streams, that sort of thing. So I think those two angles, certainly if we can be proactive and remediate these things prior to them affecting us, obviously that's the best approach that we can possibly take. But certainly from a scientific standpoint, it's important to understand certainly how these may be impacting our biology. I think obviously we've been seeing this over time, increasing in concentrations, and so as we become more and more heavily dependent on plastics, I mean it's impossible not to be in our current state. It's certainly an important question to address because I think it's challenging to not be able to live without plastics, at least at this point.
When you start thinking about it from the human health perspective, it can feel a little bit strange because we take over-the-counter medications, we take, when we're sick, we want access to pharmaceuticals in order to treat our illnesses. And so we see them as a way to safeguard our health, not necessarily as a contaminant. But because they're never present in the water alone, you typically see many pharmaceuticals in the water at the same time because they're coming from wastewater treatment plants, which of course receive our wastewater from everybody who's contributing to that treatment plant. And so what we're trying to understand and what I'm hoping is going to be done in this next phase is whether we should be regulating pharmaceuticals on a compound by compound basis, or should we be thinking about their synergistic behavior and regulate based on the synergistic effects of having multiple compounds in the water at the same time. So we've spent a lot of time over the past 2 decades really trying to document the occurrence of these compounds in the environment and understand their potential health effects for aquatic ecosystem health as well as human health. And so this demonstrates that there's been progress made over the past 2 decades in building that level of understanding that allows or enables us to put these on the contaminant candidate list. So I think we've done a good job demonstrating that research. Clearly there's more work to be done, and that's the work that'll happen in this next step. This is biosolid stuff. Let's see if I have any drinking water. I do have drinking water. I just hold or put names. I don't know if anybody would